So Justin, awesome to have you here.
Thanks for being here, yeah.
You know, your topic, the thing that you're most interested in is something that actually the Epoch Times is incredibly interested in. We've been publishing on it for almost 2 decades.
Right.
So how about this? What's your perspective on socialism?
Well, I'm the author of Socialism Is Evil, the moral case against Marx's radical dream.
Summarizes it well, right?
I'm not hiding my opinion of socialism very much. I believe socialism is the most dangerous idea in the world. I think it's very easy for people to buy into it. People who are disenfranchised, people who are down and out, I think it's very easy to go to them and say, look, there's all these people in the world, they have wealth. If we just take that wealth from them and give it to you, your life will be so much better. It's a very easy sell to people.
Right.
And so I think that the people who peddle socialism are taking advantage of that. People who are disenfranchised and need something, and they're being sold this idea that is actually incredibly destructive and immoral.
Let's try this. Thing I've been fascinated with, we've known that there's this, basically kind of socialist movement in America for a long time, but in the last year or a couple of years, it seems to be just way out front and center.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit why you think that is? And am I right? Has there been a change?
Oh, there's undeniably. The polling results show that 57% of Democrats say that they have a favorable view of socialism. About half of all millennials say that they have a favorable view of socialism. There are more Democrats who have a favorable view of socialism than capitalism. This is a relatively new development. And I believe that it's the result of decades of indoctrination.
So has it shifted, or are people just admitting to it?
No, I think it's shifted genuinely. I think what we're seeing is that there's been a rise of socialism in America because of decades of indoctrination and effort from the left in America's public schooling system, the K through 12 level, at the college level. You see it in Hollywood and the mainstream press. They're supporting socialism at all these levels, and it's finally starting to pay off. I'm a millennial. I know lots of people who say they identify themselves as socialists. I don't think that most younger people even understand what socialism is, or really at a foundational level. Right. But they're willing to sign on to it. They're willing to say they put their names behind it because they have this distorted view of it that's been ingrained in them from all of these years of listening to the mainstream press and Hollywood and their school teachers.
So if you have a few examples of this specific distortion, like what would the distorted view be that people have, and how does that correspond with the reality?
Right. I think that the biggest reason younger people support socialism is because they have this idea that the Nordic countries, specifically, especially Norway, Denmark, Sweden, that these places are bastions of socialism, that they are socialist utopias, and that's the ideal model for the world. In reality, those are not socialist countries. They have some industries that are socialized, just like America has some industries that are socialized.
Quite heavily, in fact.
Yes, absolutely. But in certain aspects, they're freer in those countries than we are. Analyses that have been done by the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute, organizations like that, have shown that when it comes to certain regulatory issues, business freedom, when it comes to certain things having to do with property rights and that sort of thing, they're freer than we are in the United States. They also do not have any debt. They're very good at spending money and staying within their means. These are not ideas that are supported by socialists here in the United States. It's actually much closer to what you would see in the Soviet Union or something like that. Not the totalitarian parts of it, but the policy angles of it, without question. And so I think a lot of it stems from a misunderstanding of what socialism is, and really the idea that these countries are socialist countries when in fact they're not.
So you mentioned that they're in some ways freer.
Right.
And so that's a so socialism in your mind is inherently not free or freedom restricted.
Absolutely.
It's always like that? I don't think that's what people think.
Absolutely not. I think most people think socialism is like synonymous with charity, when in reality socialism is about force, manipulation, and control. At the foundation of socialism, going all the way back to Karl Marx.
Communism is force. Isn't socialism communism without the force?
Absolutely not. Socialism at its core, socialism, communism, collectivism, however you want to phrase it, at its core, requires taking people's wealth and then redistributing it and collectively owning and managing it. That's what socialism is all about, whether that's in several industries or an entire economy. That's the core of socialism.
Green New Deal is
the Green New Deal,
like the personification of what you just described, isn't it?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes. It's taking over gigantic industries in the United States, or it would if it were passed, and then redistributing the wealth to other people. That's what socialism and communism is. It is not a choice people are freely making to give up their own wealth. That's what charity is. That's a good thing. It's instead forcing people to do that, forcing people to give up their wealth, and then collectively owning and managing it, which is really the dirty little secret about socialism and communism. Even if it could work theoretically in terms of providing people with wealth and a better life and better health care, even if it worked that way, and I don't believe it does, but even if it did, it wouldn't matter, because you would still then have to collectively manage it, which means you can't have any minority opinions don't matter. The majority in a democratic social society, the majority would decide how everybody lives, what services everyone has, what's right and what's wrong. It would all be decided by 51% of society in elections. And so in essence, it's tyranny of the majority at best. And in reality, what usually happens is the majority gives their power to a tiny little minority, and it becomes tyranny by,
the dictatorship
by
of
a
the
dictatorship.
proletariat.
Well, exactly right.
Well, so this, again, so I want to jump back to this, because I feel like one of the myths that I keep thinking about is that, communism, yes, there's violent revolutions. Some people don't even know that, but
right.
that the violent revolution and overtaking of the owning class and so forth is a fundamental step in the creation of a communist utopia, a communist society. Always attempted, always tried, always the same results. That's what we've seen. Now, however, socialism is the clean, friendly version that doesn't require violence. Okay? There's some forcing, but it's not forcing at the barrel of a gun, like Mao famously said it,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Am I right?
To some extent, yeah, but I think one of the problems that we've run into when we're talking about socialism and communism is that there has been, in people's minds, a very clear difference between socialism and communism, as though they're radically different things. In reality, if you go back and look at what Karl Marx had to say about it, Karl Marx essentially believed communism was a kind of socialism. That's just like we have conservatism, and then there's little branches within conservatism, right? Like maybe you have social conservatives, right? That's one kind of, Karl Marx believed he was a socialist. And so later on, the sort of history of how that all happened was later on, especially with the Russian Revolution and all of that, then the terms kind of got changed because the Russians who were in power at that time didn't want to associate themselves with socialist anymore, because the word socialism meant you supported World War I, and World War I was terrible, and so we're going to call ourselves communists instead. But really, at its core, they're essentially the same thing, in my opinion. It's just over time we've had different visions of it. And by the way, if you read what the Socialist Party of Great Britain has to say, or many socialist parties around the world, they'll be the first ones to admit to you that there is no difference between socialism and communism. They're in essence the same thing.
So there's a terrible lack of education around these topics in America, essentially around the world, maybe even worse in other places.
Right.
How do we get people to know about this stuff? And I'm not talking about the people that are at CPAC, which probably most of them agree.
Right.
But
yeah, I think there needs to be a massive educational effort. I think within the news media, people who believe in individual liberty and free markets need to explain what socialism is. We need to talk about how there's been 167 million people exiled, murdered, or imprisoned by socialist and communist parties over the past 100 years. That's like 50,000 September 11th attacks, more than 50,000. Socialism is incredibly dangerous. We need to talk about that. We need to debunk the myth that Nordic socialism is actually socialism. In reality, it's not. It's mixed market economies. And we have efforts efforts at the Heartland Institute that we're doing where I work. We've launched a socialism project to educate people. We have a website, stoppingsocialism.com, that's for that purpose, to explain to people the history of socialism, talk about what Karl Marx actually believed, how he believed that we needed a despotism temporarily, he thought, so that we could take everybody's wealth and redistribute it. He actually called it the despotic inroads on the rights of property. So, I mean, these ideas have existed for literally decades. It's all well documented, it's just people don't know them. So we need an educational effort to show people what the truth is about socialism. And once we do that, I think people will turn away from it.
So tell us the website again.
Absolutely, stoppingsocialism.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. Such a pleasure to have you.
Yes, great. It was so nice meeting you.